All right, good afternoon, this lovely Wednesday afternoon from wherever you're tuned in from. It's NOI Pulse Data Chat Wednesday on WeFM 106.3 Abuja. You already know Data Chat focuses on analyzing, interpreting, and interrogating polls and survey findings, majorly from NOI polls or our national partners, as we believe this will help decision makers make better policies and also help the average Nigerian better understand the numbers. On today's edition of Data Chat, we will be reflecting on findings of NY Post surveys on female genital mutilation, spousal violence, domestic violence, and public perception of rape in Nigeria. This is to commemorate the United Nations International Day for Elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. To this end, on today's edition of Data Chat, we will be looking at domestic violence with focus on eliminating all forms of violence against women. I am Albert David. Please stay with us. Welcome back. It's still NOI Post Data Chat on WeFM 106.3 Abuja, and it's Data Chat. We are looking at NOI Post findings on female genital mutilation, public perception of rape in Nigeria, and spousal violence. This is to commemorate this year's United Nations International Day for Elimination of all forms of violence against women. Violence against women, also known as gender-based violence, are violent acts primarily committed against women or girls. It is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations in our world today and remains largely unreported due to impunity, silence, stigma, and the shame surrounding it. The Declaration of Elimination of Violence Against Women, issued by the United Nations General Assembly in 1993, defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. Intimate partner violence, also known as spousal violence, is one of the most common forms of violence against women and includes physical, sexual, and emotional abuse and controlling behavior by an intimate partner. In commemoration of this year's United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, NOI polls reflect on findings from its past polls on spousal violence, domestic violence, female genital mutilation, and public perception of rape in Nigeria. This is because about 25% of women reported forced sex at the hands of either their current partner or their former partner. Also, the 2008 Demographic Health Survey showed that over 30.5% of married women have experienced at least one or more forms of physical, emotional, and sexual violence in their marriage. To this end, on today's edition of Data Chat, we will be looking at ending violence against women vis-a-vis the NOI polls findings of the female genital mutilation polls, spousal violence, and domestic violence. To help us interrogate the poll findings and hopefully understand the numbers, our guest in the studio to discuss the poll findings is Mrs. Sanusi Ladipo Imabong. She is the Executive Director, Women Trafficking and Child Labor Eradication Foundation. Good afternoon, Ma. It's good to have you here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for bringing me here.
Also, to discuss the poll findings is Malti Danjuma. Malti Danjuma is the communications lead with Youth Hub Africa. Good afternoon, Malti. It's good to have you here.
It was good to be here. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
All right, but before we get into the conversation proper, we'll just do a brief highlight of NOI polls findings from some polls that polls on female genital mutilation, spousal violence, and public perception of rape in Nigeria. So I'll start with the domestic violence poll. The poll was conducted to gauge public awareness of the prevalence of domestic violence in Nigeria. And the first question sought opinions of Nigerians if they've suffered any form of domestic violence. And we have 47% saying yes, they've suffered some form of domestic violence, and 53% said no. So for those who said they've suffered some form of domestic violence or they know someone who has been a victim of domestic violence, we went on to ask them who the victim was, if the victim was a man, a woman, or a child. And the majority at 67% say the victim were women, while 19% said men, 14% said the victims were children. So those are the highlights of the domestic violence poll. We also went on to ask what they consider to be the main cause of domestic violence in Nigerian homes, and the majority, 60%, went with misunderstanding, 25% stated poverty, and 5% mentioned illiteracy. So we'll move on to the spousal violence poll report. So we had asked Nigerians if they feel violence of men against women is prevalent, and we have an overwhelming 56% of Nigerians attesting to the fact that domestic violence of men against women is prevalent in the country, while 47% indicated that domestic violence of men against women is prevalent in Nigeria. If you look at the analysis by geopolitical zone, the Northwest zone has the highest prevalence of domestic violence of men against women. Also, we now move to the female genital mutilation poll. We had asked Nigerians their perception on the prevalence of female genital mutilation in the country, and 19% of Nigerians say that female genital mutilation is prevalent in their locality. Also, 14% indicated that they support female genital mutilation. Despite advocacy and public awareness, we still have a huge 14% of Nigerians in support of female genital mutilation. We'll move on to the rape poll. The rape poll sought opinions of Nigerians on the prevalence of rape in the country. One of the questions asked Nigerians, do you know or have you heard of anyone who has been a victim of rape? We have 26% saying they know someone who has been a victim of rape, and another 26% said they've heard of someone who has been a victim of rape. So we went on again to ask Nigerians if they know someone who has been raped in the past and who was the victim. We have a huge 96% of Nigerians who know someone who has been raped in the past, and majority of them reported that the victims were children between the age of 0 to 25. These are the highlights of polls we conducted, polls that are related to some form of gender-based violence. So we get into the conversation proper. So I'll start with you, Mrs. Sanusi Ladipo. What is the main cause of domestic violence in Nigeria?
I think for me, I would say primitivity, because this is what we no longer sign up for, we don't want. This is something that we have been shouting. And the truth is, every society has been primitive one way or the other. Just like when we go naked and in time past, and now we are fashionable, we can wear clothes. We have failed to accept that violence is unacceptable. So I think it's all about primitivity and then the ignorance of human dignity. First of all, even the Nigerian Constitution protects everyone. Before you go as far as the United Nations, the Nigerian Constitution 1999, section 32, 42, 33 talks about dignity, talks about protection of human rights. So I think basically we all do not understand what our rights are, and also the violator does not understand what human rights is or are. Basically, I think I would say the 3 S, the silence, the stigma, and the shame. Because violence does not have color, it doesn't have creed, it doesn't have status. Anyone can be violated. So because of your status symbol, you may not want to open up, you may not want to call out for help, and you may not want to stop the violence because they'll say, oh, why don't you stay married? Why don't you stay with your spouse? So these 3 S, these are the basic things: the silence, the stigma, and the shame. And I think if we continue shouting, it will get to a time that we'll no longer accept this. Just like there was a time that we were using our seat belts. So now it's compulsory for us to use seat belts. Violence against humans, you have to take everyone that we are, first of all, humans. No one is a toy. No one is an instrument to be battered. If we understand that, I think we begin to change our perception on violence.
All right, thank you so much for that, Ma. No one is an instrument to be battered. Malti, I'll come to you now.
Okay.
According to a 2013 Nigeria Demographic Health Survey, nearly 3 in 10 Nigerian women have experienced some form of physical violence before the age of 15. In your opinion, what are the consequences of this? What are the consequences of women and young children experiencing some form of violence even while they are still children? How will this translate to them when they become adults? And what are the consequences?
I believe generally, the consequences to these, it just spreads all over. There are just a lot of consequences to these. Some that the society has even identified, and a couple that we're yet to identify. Even the victims, or should I say the survivors of this form of violence, are yet to identify that this is one of the reasons, or as a result of this abuse, that they are acting a certain way that they are acting without them having to know. One of the consequences is self-esteem. It literally affects the child's self-esteem, because you just give a number that is below the considered age for adulthood that the society, especially Nigeria, accepts, 18. So these children tends to affect their self-esteem, and aside the physical violence, there's also of course emotional violence. So they tend to accept who they are not. They tend to accept whatever is being told to them by their abusers. So they take it in as their reality, and they act in a certain manner based on what they perceive to be their reality. I mean their person. Another thing again is the fact that they act a certain way, and they may be they most likely would translate this form of violence that they receive to either their children or people who are in their care or people around them. So you get to see certain women say that if their husbands don't beat them up, then they don't love them, and that's because they've been made to believe that physical violence by either their parents or their guardians or people who have been placed under their care, whom they've been placed under to be taken care of, love them some certain way. That's why they beat them. So you see this misunderstanding and a misorientation, would I call it that, because they just feel they tend to perceive things differently from people who grew up in proper situations. So these are the consequences. And then when they are also placed as leaders of the society, it just transcends, and then you see people who do not have empathy, who act in a certain way, and then it just negatively affects the society around them as well, because it's really risky to place someone with that kind of notion, who has been brought up that certain way, to be able to take on full leadership responsibility and act properly. So these consequences they are just so many.
Sorry, let me add to it. Trauma is one of those consequences, and if trauma not dealt with, will always affect the victim. Trauma does two things: it disempowers and disconnects you. So it can never be connected to the real you, to the real power that you have.
Female genital mutilation is one of the ways in which women face some form of trauma. A poll conducted by NOI Polls in 2020 revealed that about 2 in 10 Nigerians say female genital mutilation is still prevalent in their locality, including 14%, part of which are women, who say they support female genital mutilation. The Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act is a legal framework which is supposed to protect vulnerable people, including women and girls. Despite passing this act in 2015, why do we still have a high prevalence of female genital mutilation in some communities in Nigeria?
I'm grateful that you said some communities, because actually some people have risen against that, and we are seeing it working. But the reason is because of cultural perception. It is believed that when there's female genital mutilation, the person will not be promiscuous. That's one of the basic reasons. And because, like the young speakers talked about, what has been done and is being passed down. So it is an issue of culture. But I'm happy that a lot of traditional birth attendants, they are going against this. They are actually educating and enlightening parents and family and community. I think one of the things we can do is to make use of the traditional institutions and the religious institutions to propagate this message. If you don't understand the implication, if you don't understand the damage done to the victim, you can never know how far the victim goes, and I mean how far, how deeply enshrined the pain. The pain is enduring. I think it's not just girls. There are also some boys who don't get circumcised at the age of 8 days, which is the recommended act, maybe for religious purpose. These are the things that we have to do away with. You remember that culture is not a way of the people, the way they dress, the way they eat, the way they speak. So this is a culture that we do not want to accept any longer. We have all agreed that we should do away with harmful cultural practices and embrace the good one. We cannot do without our culture. Our culture is part of us. It is part of how we continue to live. But it is so painful that this female genital mutilation has sent a lot of girls to to their early graves. When it is turned for some people who have heard that this is wrong, they run away and they run into wrong hands. You see some people who live under the bridges, they said they ran away from their communities because of female genital mutilation. It is good that those who have survived, they come to speak. I think it's good to use survival voices. One of the themes for the international days, like the World Day Against Human Trafficking, was victim voice leads the way. It's good for us to advocate that survivors of this act come to speak against it, and also for parents to understand that this does not add value to the victim. It doesn't make us understand what we are made for. We are made, to function in our full capability. So it is good for the community to understand. There should be a lot of advocacy visits, a lot of sensitization, and also include the traditional birth attendant. These people are doing so much. Unfortunately, we may think that it's only those in the cities, in the hospitals, regular hospitals, that do a lot. These people, the community depends on them. When it is time, it is them they will run to. And again, it is good for the government to put outright sanction. These communities, we should, from the National Assembly, we should have bills that will stop this outrightly. It's good for the girl child to be protected, even the woman folk. And then mothers themselves, they are the ones that will get the whole thing ready. They are the ones that will be camera ready for all the show. We should enlighten mothers. There's nothing you gain from such. It further batters the minds of those people. It makes the individual eventually frigid. Yes, the person will come there are two things. When you face trauma, you either go this way or that way. You snap whether to anxiety or to depression. Such people, you see them get frigid, or they just become like loose tap. That's why you see some people, they are just loosened. They can't control their urge. They said, okay, because they want to protest. You did this for me so that I'll not be promiscuous. Okay, I'll show you who I am. So these are things that disempower women. The cultural aspect, the advocacy. We need sensitization. We need massive sensitization to an advocacy to end this, because it will never stop if we don't raise our voices, and we need to allow survivors to carry the message far and wide.
All right, thank you so much, Ma. Letting survivors' voice lead the way.
Yes.
So I'll come to you, Malti. A survey conducted by NOI Polls in 2020 revealed that about 3 in 10 adult Nigerians believe that the issue of rape is prevalent. They either know someone, they've either been a victim of rape, or know someone who has been a victim of rape. Also, a report by Amnesty International revealed that within the first 10 months of 2020, a total of 11,200 rape cases were reported. In your opinion, is the issue of rape, is it given enough attention? Rapists, are they given the right, do they face the right punishment? Advocacy organizations, all stakeholders, are they doing enough to discourage this practice in Nigeria?
So first of all, the thing about, before I answer your question, I'll just be very brief. The thing about rape cases, the prevalence of rape cases, is I'm torn between the fact that I think people speaking out more, and rape survivors are being more vocal. Like my colleague said earlier, she said there's the 3S: silence, stigma, and shame. So a lot of people who have experienced rape are still have, in the past, say like a decade ago, have been caught up between should I speak, should I not speak, how will I be viewed and all. So I think now it's because civil society organizations and citizens and also people are getting tired and they're saying, hey, speak, if you have suffered this, speak, and your voice will be heard and will fight for you and all of that. That is why we see as if there's been, I think it's just been going on, and then social media has tried to has started accommodating a lot of those complaints, and people are beginning to emerge to support people who have suffered it. Now I think that's why it now seems like it's more prevalent, in as much as 2020 reported that there's been a lot of cases of that, and that's because of the lockdown and people tied in one location and all of that. So going back to have we done enough, I think while it is commendable with regards to the efforts of civil societies and all, I still feel like we still have a long way to go, because a lot of advocacy has to still be done. Now, one very important aspect is more stringent laws, tightening the laws and ensuring that offenders, I feel like the reason people still commit these crimes is because they feel they can get away with it. And then sadly, most of these rape cases that we see are usually tied within, say, family needs. An uncle raped this person, a housemate was raped by an uncle or a father of the, and so families tend to try to want to cover this because they feel like it's going to be a shame, and so let us cover a stigma and all of that, still boiling down to stigma, shame, and silence. You understand? So I feel like the advocacy is basically speak out, families speak out. You're not doing your children any favor by letting them keep quiet after they have been abused. Now back to the government. Government ensure that there are stricter rules. Now rules like the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which tends to protect the rights of individuals, especially women who are the receiving end of all of this form of violence, have to be domesticated at state level. States are yet to domesticate such laws. As simple as a child rights bill, there are still states that are yet to domesticate this child rights bill, and inside this bill are part of the provisions of the bills are things that see to the well-being of the child and the protection of the child against such forms of violence, like even rape. So when we have more policies that are being enforced and not just adopted at federal level but domesticated at state level, as well as making stringent laws, I mean, these people, is it an Indonesian country? Is it where in Asia where people are being castrated for having to commit such crimes as rape? I mean, if we have more stringent rules and people are seeing that there are more grave punishments for stuff like that, then quite a lot will be sorted, really.
Sorry, let me just quickly for the issue of rape, it's always about power play.
Yeah.
And you know, they go on in the family, they go on in institutions, and most of the time you see these perpetrators hiding behind. They don't actually come. You know what is happening right now in the camp? You know, you can hear all the noise about the bill from the National Assembly. You know, it is something that has to do, when these children are being the students, they're actually being raped by those big ones, the big shots.
Yeah.
And the students are closer to the smaller, younger lecturers who always accommodate, relate with them. So there's always a power play. There's a need for the Senate to make sure that this kind of people are there in decision making for the policy. And then every rapist, every perpetrator, especially in an institution like that, should be published. And then there should be a reportage channel. There should be a sexual offense and abuse and a harassment policy in every institution, in every school, in every home. We should understand, what does this institution, what is your stance? We should know your stance against this issue of rape, because rape is really terrible at workplace. Workplace rape is another great thing. So when you begin to look at the power play, it's because there is something you have to exchange for something, like the sex for marks issue. Now we heard that some lecturers, they will give you the right mark, good, because they have been eyeing you. What they will do, they will use another lecturer to molest you, and so you must come back and bow. You must come under their whims and caprice. You must come at their beckon. So these are the things that are happening. How are the youth? How are they coping? What is the government? What is an institution that is made to protect them? What are they doing against issue of rape? because rape is not just domestic, it's something systemic, and it is staying with us. We must decipher and sieve these perpetrators out.
All right, so while you round up your last words, please, what are the most effective ways to tackle all forms of violence against women and girls? Please, your last word in 30 seconds.
Advocacy, prevention, the government should do their part. It's all whole of the government, whole of the society. The parents to teach their children basic rights. We must pass the Child's Right Act, like she said. The VAP Act, we must implement. All states must come on board. We must know that without the protection of children from the childhood, whatever happens to you at your childhood will definitely affect your adulthood. We must prevent violence against children. We must empower women and must empower survivors to speak. We keep on preventing, and the issue is we must talk, and talk.
Malti, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, even though it was passed in 2015, most states that have even adopted the act are cherry picking some section of the act. So while you round up, what can be done about this, and what are the most effective ways to end all forms of violence against women?
Cherry picking.
Because you have them adopting only some section that is applicable to them. They feel like, oh, I don't need this. Let's just leave this.
So this might sound very biased, but the truth of the matter is that is why we need more women in decision-making table. Because if you check such places where they are cherry picking what fits, what suits them, and so that some other people are safer, you'd realize that there's no gender balance, and so you would see that opinions are not really brought together. I mean, there's no gender balance, so there's no fair play in the sense that such laws are being, some of the parts of this bill is being exempted, while others that favor or tend to cushion them is being provided. So I just feel like there should be equal play, and I feel like there should also be checks and balance. I really do not know how this can come about, but with checks and balance, such things would be looked into, right? Such things would be looked into, is just my opinion. And what was your last question?
I think you've answered my last question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to add to what my colleague said, I feel like the way forward as well is stiffer penalties. There should just be stiffer penalties to tackle issues around gender-based violence, and safer spaces for survivors to speak out.
All right. Thank you so much for your insightful contribution. I think this is a call to the government and all relevant stakeholders to invest more in collecting data on gender-based violence, and also make use of available data in making policies around domestic violence and eliminating all forms of violence against women. On behalf of the entire staff and management of NOI Post, I want to say a very big thank you to you, Ma. Thank you to your team and everything you're doing to end all forms of violence against women.
Thank you.
And to you, Malti, thank you to your organization, Youth Hub Africa, for everything they are doing to end all forms of violence against women. To our dear listeners, till we have this conversation again, do have yourself a lovely week.